There's a difference between peace and the absence of conflict. One is built on honesty, and the other is built on what people have decided not to bring up. She's learned to manage around your emotional availability, not your physical presence. It's your emotional absence. Your family isn't supposed to function best when they ask for less from you. That's not health. That's adaptation to scarcity. Peace that costs honesty isn't peace. It's just managed distance with a better name. The question isn't whether you want a peaceful home. The question is whether you're willing to do what real peace requires. Let's see. Nothing's broken. There's no yelling. There's no conflict. And there's no drama. From where you sit, things feel pretty stable. Peaceful even. And you've interpreted that calm as evidence that things are working. But here's what you might be missing. The calm you're experiencing isn't alignment. It's avoidance that everyone's agreed not to name. And there's a difference between peace and the absence of conflict. One is built on honesty, and the other is built on what people have decided not to bring up. And so this episode is about what you're calling peace and what it's actually costing you. So let's talk about what you're calling peace. Here's what it looks like from your perspective. No one's upset, no one's complaining, and conversations are calm. The house runs, and everyone's handling their responsibilities. You're doing your part. Everyone else is doing theirs. And because there's no visible tension, you assume things are good. But let me ask you something. When was the last time your spouse brought something difficult to you? Not logistics, not schedules, not, can you handle this? But something real, something vulnerable, something that mattered to her, but might create tension if she brought it up. Take a second and actually think about that. Not in theory. When was the actual last time? And if you're struggling to remember, that's not peace. That's a system where difficult conversations have been eliminated and not resolved. And there is a difference. Resolved means the hard things were addressed and they were worked through. Elimination means the hard things stopped being brought up. And if your spouse has stopped bringing up the hard things to you, it's not because everything's resolved. It's because she's learned that bringing them up doesn't lead anywhere productive. So guess what? She stopped. So when was the last time that your kid came to you with something that they were struggling with? It's not a problem that you could fix. It's not, Dad, can you help me with this homework? Or, Dad, can you drive me here? Something that they were feeling. Something they were uncertain about. Maybe even something they needed to process with you, not to have you solve for them. And if they're not bringing those types of things up to you, it's not because they don't have them. It's because every kid does have some uncertainty, and every kid has things they're working through. It's because they've learned you're not the person who handles those kind of conversations. So maybe they've tried once, and you turned it into a problem to solve. And maybe they tried once, and you were distracted. Maybe they even tried once, and you gave them advice when they needed just your presence. And so they learned. They learned that you're available for what you're not. And the deeper things, they take that elsewhere. So again, when was the last time you had a real conversation with your spouse? Not about what needs to happen next week, and not about responsibilities or the logistics of the household, and not about who's picking up the kids or what's for dinner or whether the bill got paid. I mean a conversation about how you're doing, about what's working and what's not, what's on her mind, what's on your mind, and what kind of conversation that requires you to actually be present and not just processing the next task while she's talking. And if those conversations aren't happening, you don't have peace. You have functional distance. And functional distance feels calm until you realize what it's actually costing you. It feels calm because there is no conflict. But the absence of conflict isn't the same as presence of connection. So you can have a perfectly calm house where no one's fighting and no one's connected, where everyone's doing their part but no one's actually with each other. So question, what are you calling peace that might actually be avoidance? Here's what avoidance actually looks like in a functional system. Scenario 1. Your spouse has something on her mind. She starts to bring it up. You sense it's going to be one of those conversations, the kind that doesn't have a clean solution. It's the kind that requires you to actually be present, not just solve a problem. It's the kind that might take 20 minutes or an hour and you don't know where it's going to go. So, what do? You don't shut it down. You're not hostile. You just redirect. Let's talk about it later. I've got a lot on my plate right now. Or, I hear you. Just give me some time to think about it. Or maybe, can we table this after? And you think of an event. And so she lets it go. It's not because the issue was resolved, but not because she changed her mind about it mattering anymore, but because she learned that pushing just creates tension and you both avoid tension. So she backs off and you tell her, we'll get to it later. But guess what? Later never comes. Because when later arrives, there's always something else, isn't there? And that's not peace. That's just managed avoidance. And the thing that didn't get addressed, well, it didn't disappear either. It just went underground. So here's another scenario. There's something you know needs to be addressed. Maybe it's a pattern that you notice. It's a conversation that needs to happen. A decision that's been deferred for too long. Maybe it's something about how you're functioning as a family. Maybe it's something about your marriage. And maybe it's something about one of your kids that just needs attention. And you know it needs to be addressed. But bringing it up would create discomfort. It would disrupt the calm. And it might even lead to conflict. Or at least a conversation that you just don't want to have. It's a conversation where you might have to be vulnerable. Where you might have to admit you don't have the answer. Where you might have to actually engage with something that doesn't have a clean solution. So guess what? You don't bring it up. You wait, you manage around it, and you tell yourself, this is not urgent. I'll deal with this when the timing's right. But the timing just never gets better, does it? There's never been a perfect moment to have a hard conversation. There's always something else going on. And so the thing that needs to be addressed just becomes more entrenched. So what happens? The pattern solidifies. The dynamic becomes normal. And what could have been addressed early now becomes structural. And that's not peace. That's just deferred responsibility. And so let's consider another scenario. Let's look at our kids. Your kid is struggling with something. You can see it. They're not themselves and there's something that's off. But they're not bringing it to you. And you're not asking. And why is that? Because asking would require you to enter a conversation that you're not sure how to navigate. It's a conversation that, again, doesn't have a clear solution. It's a conversation that's going to require emotional presence, not just advice. It'll be a conversation where you might have to just be with them in their uncertainty, and guess what? Not fix it. And I know that's so hard. So you wait for them to bring it up, and you tell yourself, if it's really important, they'll say something. But guess what? They don't. It's not because they don't need you, and it's not because it's not important, but because they've learned you're not available for those kind of conversations. They've learned that when they bring the uncertain things to you, you either give them a solution they don't need, or you're distracted. So they just stop bringing them. And you interpret their silence as, everything's fine. That's not peace. That's relational distance being normalized. So question, what difficult conversation are you avoiding right now and calling it not the right time? Let's be specific. What do you know that needs to be addressed, but you're waiting for better circumstances to address it? So let me ask you an even harder question. What do you think it's like for your spouse to live in this version of peace? Not what you hope it's like, not what you assume it's like, what it's actually like. Because here's what she might be experiencing, whether she's naming it or not. She's learned what's safe to bring up and what isn't. Not because you're hostile, and it's not because you're unkind, but because certain topics create tension that neither of you wants to navigate. So guess what? She self-edits. She brings the logistics, the safe stuff, the things that have a clear answer. Can you handle this? What do you think about this decision? Here's what's happening next week. But those harder things, the things that truly matter most, she just stops bringing them. The things that don't have clear answers. The things that require you to actually be with her in the uncertainty. The things that would require vulnerability from both of you. She stopped bringing those, not because they're resolved, but because bringing them up doesn't lead anywhere. You either deflect them or defer them, or you solve them far too quickly without actually engaging with what she's really saying. So she's learned to manage around your emotional availability. It's not your physical presence. It's your emotional absence. Not your physical absence, it's your emotional absence. You're there, you're in the house, and you're at the dinner table, but you're not available for the conversations that require vulnerability. And it's those conversations that don't have endpoints. It's the kind of conversations that are about being present and not really about solving. And so she's built a life that functions without requiring your full presence. She makes certain decisions herself. She carries certain things alone. She processes certain emotions without you. It's not because she wants to, but because the alternative is trying to engage in conversations that you're not available for. And what's even more painful than that is just she's trying to handle it herself. That's not partnership, that's parallel operations. She's carrying the things alone that were meant to be shared. Not the logistics. She can handle the logistics. She's completely capable. She's totally competent. But emotional weight, uncertainty, the harder relational decisions, the things that require two people to think through together, because when she brings those things to you, you either solve them quickly or defer them indefinitely. And neither response is what she actually needs. She doesn't need you to fix it. She doesn't need you to defer it. She needs you to be in the conversation with her, to think through it together, to be present while uncertain, to share the weight of not knowing the answer yet. But you're not available for that, not because you're a bad person, but because you've built a system where peace is maintained by avoiding those exact conversations. And so a question for you. What would your spouse say if she could be completely honest without consequence? If there's no risk of tension, no risk of disrupting the calm, no risk of you getting defensive or shutting down, would she say you're present? Or would she say you're managing? Would she say she feels connected to you? Or would she say she's learned to function without you being fully available? So here's what happens in a system where peace is maintained through avoidance. People learn what not to bring up. Your spouse learns which conversations to skip. Your kids learn which things to handle on their own. Your family learns that calm is maintained by not pushing, by not creating any tension, by not bringing up what doesn't have a clear resolution. And that becomes the rule. Unspoken, but enforced. Don't disrupt the peace. Don't create tension, and don't bring up what makes dad uncomfortable. And don't bring up what doesn't have a clear answer. And so those hard things go unaddressed. Not because they don't exist, and it's not because they don't matter, but because addressing them would disrupt the system. And everyone's agreed, silently, that disruption is worse than drift. But here's the problem. Drift doesn't announce itself. It doesn't create visible tension. It just accumulates year after year, conversation after conversation that doesn't happen. And connection that doesn't form, honesty that doesn't surface, and what you're calling peace is just managed distance that everyone's learned to tolerate. And it's not that things are bad, it's that they could be so much better, and no one's allowed to say so. So another question for you. What has your family learned not to bring to you? Not just your spouse, your kids too. What have they learned is off limits? What have they learned creates tension rather than connection? What have they stopped expecting from you? Real peace doesn't come from avoiding difficult conversations. It comes from having them. Not perfectly, not comfortably, but definitely honestly. Real peace means your spouse can bring the hard things to you and you don't deflect. You don't say later. You don't turn it into a problem to solve. You just stay in the conversation with her, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you don't know where it's going, even when there's no clear resolution. Because you see, real peace means your kids know you're available for those conversations, especially the ones that have no clear answers. That they can bring uncertainty to you, that they can bring confusion to you, that they can bring emotions to you. And you won't fix them or dismiss them or be too busy for them. You'll just be with them in it. See, real peace means bring up what needs to be addressed, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when this timing just isn't going to be perfect. And even when it might create short-term tension. But because unresolved tension doesn't disappear, it goes underground. And underground tension is worse than any surface level conflict. Because, as we know, it's going to erode trust without giving anyone the chance to address it. It creates distance without anyone actually naming it. It puts up walls without anyone actually knowing they're there. And so the question isn't whether you want peace. Of course you want peace. Everybody wants peace. The real question is whether you're willing to have conversations that real peace requires. The conversations that might create short-term discomfort, but build long-term trust. The conversations that don't have clean endings, but create real connection. The conversations that require vulnerability from you, not just from them. And so the question here, what conversation would restore that honesty, even if it disrupted the calm? What do you know needs to be said, but you've been protecting the peace by not saying it? And so it's time for us to bring this all the way home. If your version of peace requires avoidance of hard conversations, it's not peace. It's a truce. And truces don't build connection. They just prevent conflict. Your spouse isn't supposed to manage around you. She's supposed to be able to bring her whole self to you, including the uncertain parts, the vulnerable parts, the parts that don't have answers yet. Your kids aren't supposed to self-edit before they bring things to you. They're supposed to know that you're available, fully available for whatever they need to process. Your family isn't supposed to function best when they ask for less from you. That's not health. That's adaptation to scarcity. And that's not a thriving environment. That's a managed one. And managed environments don't feel peaceful. They feel controlled. They feel constrained. They feel like everyone's walking on eggshells, not to avoid explosions, but to avoid disrupting the system. So some closing questions for you. What are you protecting by avoiding conflict? Are you protecting connection, or are you protecting comfort? And what's it costing the people who matter most? You're not fighting, and that might feel like peace. But if the calm in your house is built on what people have learned not to bring up, It's not peace. It's avoidance that everyone's agreed to maintain. And avoidance doesn't build trust. It erodes it quietly. Because real peace requires honesty, even when honesty creates tension. Because peace that costs honesty isn't peace. It's just managed distance with a better name. The question isn't whether you want a peaceful home. The question is whether you're willing to do what real peace requires, which is having the conversations that you've been avoiding. Not someday, but now. You know, the band of brothers is where men stop managing distance and start building real connection. And if that's where you are, you know what to do.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man Podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.